One of the things that we want to explore in first stage trauma treatment is helping the client being able to identify those things that might trigger some of those trauma symptoms. Trauma symptoms like nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, hypervigilance. Here's a list of possible triggers that clients might experience. Reminders of past events, lack of control, separation or loss, their routine or their schedule being disrupted, feelings of vulnerability or rejection, feeling threatened, and then sensory overload. So reminders of past events. Those could be a picture, it could be a smell, it could be that they find themselves in the same environment of where the trauma occurred. And of course, clients cannot avoid all of these triggers. It's an ability to be able to identify that they're being triggered, and then what can they do now in order to ride those feelings out? Do they need to spend a little time doing grounding? Do they need to self-soothe using their senses? Do they need to reach out for help? Another trigger that many clients will experience those trauma symptoms resurfacing is when they feel a lack of control. That sense of powerlessness when they experience that traumatic event then coincides in the present when they feel like that lack of control is happening. That's why in first stage trauma treatment, we put such an emphasis on giving our clients choice and control, and even those small things. The chair they sit in the office, whether they want to accept water or not accept water. Those small little gestures that we invite clients to participate in helps them to feel like they have some of that control. Another trigger to trauma might be that feeling of separation or loss. We see that often when we have to perhaps transfer a client to a different worker, perhaps in housing, one of our clients needs to be switched to a different case manager, and that sense of separation or loss can really open up and trigger some of those trauma symptoms again. Routine or schedule being disrupted. We often need to reschedule clients or move an appointment for a variety of reasons. And sometimes that request for the client to reschedule can be quite anxiety-provoking for them. That routine or schedule being kept is sometimes the way that they feel that sense of control in their present life. How do we then coach the client or encourage the client to go back to some of those self-soothing or grounding exercises that they might need in order to cope with that change? Clients, when feeling rejected or feeling vulnerable, that can happen in a variety of settings. We think back to some of those DBT skills and the interpersonal relationship skills, where people have to be able to have their own self-respect first before they can move forward and offer something to others. And so that sense of vulnerability that quickly creeps in when they feel that a relationship might be threatened, a relationship might be jeopardized, or maybe in fear of a relationship ending. And we see this often, don't we, when we think about termination of client services here, and that vulnerability that arises, and sometimes that fear that they're being rejected. And so that's why the termination of services, especially through a trauma-informed lens, would suggest that people would be informed of the length of therapy right from the beginning, and termination is continually discussed to help prepare clients for endings. And then we have feeling threatened is a big trigger. That can happen in the community. It can also happen, just in the tiny little ways in the office. Going over to greet your client and getting too close while they're sitting down and we're standing up. It could feel very threatening to have somebody kind of looming over them. So thinking of ways that clients could feel safe, whether they need to pull back their chair a little bit in group, whether they need to walk behind or in front, whether they need to be near the door or away from the door. What are ways that they can do things, how can they do things differently here in order to feel less threatened? And then finally, we have sensory overload. So we think about clients who find it very difficult to maybe be like in an amusement park, in a mall. I had a client where a huge success for her in first stage trauma treatment was she needed a pair of running shoes, and she felt like she could not manage the sounds, the sights, and the hustle and bustle of the mall. And so she was able to go to the mall right as it opened at 9 a.m., went with a case manager, went into the store, very few people there already, bought her shoes, and just such a huge success for her that she was able to identify it may be too triggering if I go to the mall in the middle of the day, and if I do things, a few adjustments differently, I may still be able to accomplish my goal. I think back over the years of the many times that clients are triggered right here in our office. It's a normal response when someone carries a trauma past into forecast, that there are indeed going to be things that they feel triggered about. And how can they then use their skills in order to be able to manage that situation? I think of one client who was about to enter into forecast at the front desk, and she heard two men who she believed were in a conflict in the waiting room. The client quickly backed away from the door in a flight response and was backing out towards the staircase when she heard laughter. And then she heard the word mindfulness. And she realized that the two gentlemen who she thought were in conflict were actually two men who were excitedly talking about things that they were learning in group. This helped the client to be able to calm down her breathing, slow it down, be able to kind of offer herself some self-encouraging coping thoughts like, I'm in a safe place, they're just excited about their recovery, and she was able to come in, attend her session, and also debrief about that moment and how that interpretation of what was happening had gone farther than it needed to into a trigger back to the past where she was again with her aggressive person in her life, and how she was able to back it up again and be able to get through that trigger. I think of another client whose past trauma was connected to a person in her past who was very abusive and had a beard. We had talked a lot about going to AccuDetox as a way for her to help with her cravings around her cannabis use. And this particular client thought, yeah, I think I would like to give that a try. And so was brave one evening and came into group and attended the AccuDetox. What I didn't know is that this client's trigger were men with beards. There were two men leading AccuDetox that night. Both of them had beards. So it would have been very appropriate, and I would have encouraged her if she had asked me for her to leave if she wanted to, because that would be a very appropriate response for her to say, this is too great for me at this time and I choose not to attend. But this client was able to challenge some of those interpretations, and some of the things that she said to herself was, Cheryl would never send me into a group where something bad would happen to me. Cheryl's boss would be in such big trouble if anyone hurt me while I was in this group. Forecast would lose their reputation if something bad would happen to me in this group. She was able to look around the group room and recognize that there were other people there just like her, committed to their recovery, and that she could feel safe in this room. So as she was telling me this story, it just really struck me about how such a significant trigger, and the client was able to, with her breathing and with challenging some of those extreme thoughts, bring herself back and accomplish. So for some people, leaving the situation is the best thing that they can do for their trigger. For other people, they can't avoid all of these triggers all the time. They would be left, housebound. And so finding that balance between not pushing yourself farther than you can handle and giving yourself permission to be self-compassionate and know that maybe at that time you have to leave them all, or you have to leave AccuDetox. And at other times recognizing that we can use some of our skills as a way to manage some of these triggers.